So do we have everyone online? Okay, great. Okay. So I'm very pleased to have this next session, although I'm theoretically the moderator. In fact, really this is really a discussion amongst the three of us. To my left is Dr. Steven Spielberg, who is a senior member of Young & Partners and has had 4 careers, all of which were very, very successful. Some of us are still working on our first career, but he's had 4 careers to be successful. But he is an important member of Young & Partners because his background in science and regulatory, et cetera, is incredibly valuable in terms of work that we do with clients. We have Eli Weinberg, who's a partner of Bain Company in life sciences, which is a firm I joined very recently. When there were only 23 people, and I was the only one who actually told Bill Bain that the experience group didn't work, and I survived that meeting. So that was that. But he's in the life sciences, part. He has history both in industry but also in consulting. So we have a very nice group of people who can comment on what the disruptive innovation. We'll try to cover the areas that we think would be of greatest interest to you in terms of the impact on what you do and what your company does. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out the following. I'll first ask Dr. Spielberg to talk. He's going to talk about what areas that he sees from technology and therapy are the ones that are being disrupted. And then I'll ask Eli to talk. He'll talk a bit about AI, but also what he sees as some of the other things with regard to commercial models, et cetera. And then I'll follow at the end and talk a little about on the manufacturing side, but also I just want to let you know, but he is related to the Steven Spielberg who directed E.T., but he's not as wealthy as the others. Spielberg, right?
I am old.
Okay, Dr. Spielberg.
Well, as they used to say in Monty Python, now for something totally different. This is my 50th year as a physician, and more specifically as a pediatrician. And what I want to do is look at innovation, disruptive technology, success and failure in it, a bit from a historical perspective. So if you'll permit me, pretend we're back in the 1940s. It was a time that polio was rampant and made even more scary by the fact that we had a president who had polio. And so that there was widespread fear. In fact, in my 5th grade class, there were 2 kids who had polio. They simply disappeared, and parents were afraid to talk about those kinds of things with kids. And there was a scramble for new technology, for new innovation. And there were loads of companies competing for a better iron lung. And the hospital where I trained as a pediatrician, Boston Children's, was designed in the early 1950s around polio to accommodate iron lungs. It made it almost impossible in the 1970s to practice medicine in the facility because there had been so much enthusiasm and so much investment in making that hospital user-friendly for iron lungs. The building stood across the street from the Enders building, John Enders. I don't know if the name resonates. Salk does, but anyway, Enders was the guy, along with others, who began developing ways of culturing viruses and eggs that led to the flu vaccine. And all of a sudden, the world changed. All the iron lungs at Boston Children's are now stored in the basement. And they're an exhibit of what innovation failed to be able to do back then, and what innovation in understanding the pathogenesis of disease did to make all of that irrelevant. We're now, and we'll talk about it if you wish, at a time where politics and disinformation is making it very difficult for us as physicians to adequately immunize kids against diseases which can, in fact, kill them. And so the story here is one of innovation and one of failure to convert science and convert commercialization of that science into practical medicine. Second example I want to look at is neonatology. And it doesn't go back quite as long. It goes back into the 1960s when we recognized that premature babies died from respiratory distress. And that was due to the fact that they didn't produce surfactant. And somebody got the bright idea of squirting surfactant down into tracheal tubes into premature babies. And in fact, it led to a product, and it led to a huge decrease in death from respiratory distress syndrome of the premature. Led to more survival and made management of RDS, all these babies who were going on the latest, best technology respirator, again, became archaic. I will point out in our country right now, infant mortality is going up, including in preemies. This, despite all of our brilliance, we have a healthcare non-system. It is not working. It's very hard to look at that after 50 years in medicine. Next, a brief look at oncology in pediatrics. As I was becoming a resident, we were just beginning to have some drugs that actually worked to cure acute lymphocytic leukemia. During my lifetime, cure rates went from 20% to over 85%. But that was not necessarily due to innovation in chemotherapy. It was due to anti-nauseants. Kids, particularly teenagers, were routinely unable to complete a course of treatment for their ALL because of nausea. And then ondansetron and granisetron came along. I actually did the first studies of granisetron in kids and watched a kid with a different tumor who had been just at the point of dropping out of therapy. I said, look, we have a new drug. Let's give this a try. And I came back to her room after she got her emetogenic chemotherapy, watching her eating a chicken sandwich. And I realized I had seen a miracle. But that miracle had nothing to do with the treatment of the cancer. It had to do with the ability of kids to continue to take chemotherapy. Innovation and advances come from sometimes disparate sides, and sometimes it's worth asking, why are those kids not completing their treatment? And can we come up with innovation for anti-nauseants that will, in fact, allow them to be treated? Cystic fibrosis has been mentioned. When I was a resident at Boston Children's, we had 400 kids with CF. Most of them died early on. Those who lived had a pretty difficult life. And because, and I won't go through all of the complexities, beautiful science that ultimately led to the finding of the gene responsible for cystic fibrosis. A friend of mine did that. I remember being in the elevator when he said to me, we got the gene. Life changed. And it changed not only because of that, but because we understood the gene products, the abnormal CFTR that led to the lung and gastrointestinal problems, then led to incredible innovation, heavily driven by patients and patient advocacy groups and the CF Foundation, but then led by Vertex, the pharmaceutical company, leading to drugs and multiple different drugs that could deal with the different mutations in the CFTR and make those proteins actually work in patients. So my son, who's a pediatric pulmonary specialist now, has patients who are living normal lives with cystic fibrosis. Could I say that even 20 years ago, 10 years ago? No. So innovation. And the innovation is delicious because the science is so good. And the ability to find things that actually work as opposed to epiphenomena and drugs that might make people feel better or worse at a given time. So we've entered the genomic era. We have gene therapy. We have gene editing. We have immunologic approaches, not just vaccines for antibiotics, but vaccines for cancer. New approaches to immunology. Again, things that I could not have imagined during my early career in medicine. Let me give you one example because FDA right now is in the process of approving a drug for sickle cell anemia via gene editing. And you'd say, oh, great, they're editing the sickle cell gene. Wrong. They're editing the gene that regulates hemoglobin F, which we always knew if you had more hemoglobin F, you did better with sickle cell anemia. We had a drug, hydroxyurea, which increased hemoglobin F, but it was a pretty awful regimen, and patients tended not to take it much. And now we have something that can actually alter the gene and increase hemoglobin H. Later on, I'm not going to go into it now, we need to talk about costs and we need to talk about social equity and availability of medicines, not only for our children, but for the children around the world. So I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to put a historic perspective around how incredibly exciting the innovation is. I mean, cystic fibrosis to me, and I was at FDA when we approved the first drug for cystic fibrosis, and just like on the Entretron allowing kids to take chemotherapy, I said to myself, I've been blessed by seeing miracles. We can do it. We really, truly can do it. And the issue now is, can we make things available to those in need? So I know nothing about AI, so I'm looking forward to learning about it.
By the way, if you'll notice, Dr. Spielberg doesn't have a passion for medicine or we criticize him all the time when we have meetings. He said, you really ought to think about mankind more often, right? So
and you need to have grandchildren to truly appreciate kids.
Eli?
Sure. I struggle to follow that. I'll talk about a very different kind of disruption, which is the disruption to how people in pharma companies go about their day-to-day lives. And that's artificial intelligence. Across the mid-sized and big pharma companies that I work on, this is disruption number one that all of them are thinking about. And I won't do the history the way Dr. Spielberg did. I will just say that this has become much more of a critical issue in the past year with the emergence of foundation models. You'll need somebody better than me to talk through all of that. The two messages that I would give you is based on the foundation models and the generative AI, the capabilities. The first is technology is no longer what's holding back progress and impact. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the second is this will impact how every one of us in the room goes about our day-to-day lives. So on the first one, in terms of technology, for previous types of artificial intelligence, machine learning, there was a lot of training that went into it, a lot of investment in data. What you have essentially now is an agent who may be kind of a quirky person, but is an incredibly capable person with a lot of information at their fingertips, and they work at the speed of light. And so when we are going and develop, and because they come preloaded with all of that knowledge, it's incredibly fast to get them from zero to creating outputs or generating insights that are valuable. What we are held back by then is not the ability to get an agent to do something useful in a pharma context, whether it's write a regulatory dossier, process an adverse event report, create marketing content. It's not the technology, it is, are the users ready for that level of disruption? It is, are the regulators ready? And heard all about regulatory flexibility. Are the regulators ready for that? And are the customers and patients ready for that? So just because you can generate an infinite amount of content doesn't mean that you want to inundate physicians or patients with that infinite amount of content. So it's a really interesting time right now. We're just realizing we've gotten to the point where the technology enables us to do a whole lot of things that we couldn't do more easily than before. And it's about actually making the choices of where do we do that and how does it impact people. And then the reason that it has such an impact, and again, this is in contrast to previous technologies, it's a lot easier to say where generative AI is not applicable than where it is applicable. And I would point to two areas that you can't do virtually, and one that we're not comfortable having an artificial agent do. Doctor's talking about the question of AI in clinical trials. There is no sign that we're going to stop having to test medicines in humans to get the confidence that we should market them and put them in more humans. So clinical trials are not going away. We still need to manufacture medicine, and that's not a thing that you can do virtually. And so those are two things that artificial intelligence can be a wraparound, but they won't go away. The timelines won't appreciably change. The level of effort won't appreciably change. And the final one is making trade-off decisions. So deciding which patients to put in a clinical trial, deciding which trial to fund and which not to, deciding which physician to direct your sales force to and which to deprioritize. AI is capable of all of those things given the right inputs, but we're just not going to. So what that means is pretty much any other activity, synthesizing information, writing information, providing all the information that informs those decisions, that is all already being and going to be increasingly impacted by AI. And if you're doing anything other than thinking about those decisions and making the trade-offs and starting to think about how to communicate those to other people who will make those decisions, all the rest of that work is going to be impacted, I think, sooner than a lot of people appreciate. So maybe I'll pause there in the interest of time and let the moderator take us where we want to go.
Yeah, I'd like to comment, and I have a bridge to what we were here talking about, and that is, there's been a lot of talk about the glamorous end of pharmaceuticals, which is the invention of new technologies and so forth. The part which I don't think gets enough attention is the manufacturing side. And actually, last year, Peter Marks of FDA gave a wonderful speech on two topics. One about how vaccines have a lot of promise, but he also talked about the problem in manufacturing and a lot of these new technologies. Because the good news is these new technologies are going to be able to solve diseases that otherwise you wouldn't. But it's also true that many of them are very hard to manufacture, right? And as we all know, it might work, but if either it's really tough to manufacture or it's very expensive to manufacture, then it's still a problem, right? And actually, Peter Marks remarked, he said, some of these things, because of the cost and how long it takes to process and it's a $500,000 in treatment. It's number of people you can save is going to be very, very limited. So I think that's now the reason why there's a little connection with you on AI is that AI everybody's very excited about, but what they don't realize is the cost required to both train and produce the answers. It's huge. And right now, all these companies are raising, AI companies are raising billions of dollars, but they're actually seriously subsidizing your searches using AI. If they truly charged you the cost for your inquiry, it'd be a very different story. And they're doing it purposely, right? Because they're trying to get traction and competitive reason. But it's come out that, the cost of your inquiry, where you say, what's the best movie to go watch or whatever, right, is probably a cost that you wouldn't want to pay if they charged you, right, for that answer that question. So you see the connection, in drug manufacturing, there are two parts. One is, does it work? Is it safe? Is it efficacious? And so forth. But the other problem is, can you make it, and can you make it at a cost that makes it viable as something that's, that's viable in the marketplace? And I think that's a big challenge. I want to go into detail, but each technology has a different manufacturing problem, right? I gave you one example, but there are many, many different examples. And I feel there's not enough attention paid to that, right? That if more money went into companies that were doing research work on how to rationalize and make manufacturing less expensive, we'd all be better off, right? Because it would allow a lot of these drugs that are safe and efficacious, economically viable to a larger group of patients. So that's one area where there are disruptive innovations that are going on in manufacturing. I just don't think there are enough relative to the number of innovations on the drug research side. Right?
And another question, Eli, that sort of arises really coming from exactly what Peter was talking about. And right now best of times, worst of times, right? There's incredible technology, there's incredible understanding of disease pathogenesis. Where we seem to be stumbling are at the interfaces between a great idea and being able to make a molecule and convert that molecule into a drug. The ability to de-risk, and I love Janet's sort of summary of what the whole game is about for all of us. I make the same decisions every time I write a prescription. Am I going to place the patient at more risk or less risk? And the ability, given our healthcare non-system, to be able to adapt to all the new innovations coming down. Do you see a way that AI can make our inabilities to bridge these things begin to collapse? In other words, can it make us wiser as well as smarter?
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure it'll make us wiser, but I think AI inevitably makes some of the connections between statements. So if you look at Google made a massive announcement, I think it was about a year ago, DeepMind. Now we can model basically any protein. And I think that the initial reaction was, all right, well, now I can see the shape of any protein. How do I translate that to drugs? What they announced maybe last month was now we can do folding and docking. And now they've launched a company to do translation of identification of clinical ready assets. So once you start picking up one part, you start extending to other domains. The other thing I would say is this gives us the ability to look at data sets that combine the genomics, the patients, the outcomes. And so a lot of companies that started on the discovery side that said, we're going to look for interesting targets, what they ended up finding was actually we found a clinical biomarker, or companies that started the other way that said, we're going to plumb the EMR and see where the interesting biomarkers are. They actually said, oh, this biomarker, if I dig a little bit, that's an interesting drug target. So I think the more that the technology allows us to explore bigger data sets and link them and extract insights from it, the more it inevitably forces us to link all the way from what's that initial signature of a target that we should go after, all the way through to the molecule and then the patient identification.
Yeah. And I happen to agree with you that I think there are going to be a lot of uses of AI that turn out not to work, but I am very confident that AI will have a significant impact on the speed and the cost of drug discovery.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, I've been around for a while, so I did a lot of work with the original companies that did a lot of innovation in microfluidics and high throughput screening. And that was a huge benefit in terms of being able to figure out what the most promising molecules were and so forth. Now, other things went the other way, increased the cost of drug discovery, but that innovation And AI is kind of the equivalent of microfluidics and slate screening, because it will allow you to more intelligently screen, thousands and thousands, of potential, molecules to get to the right one. And it's working. I think it's really, really working, right?
Yeah.
Your comment about protein folding, I mean, that was the challenge initially with CF. Looking in, and when you say cystic fibrosis, it's a syndrome. And yes, it's a mutation in the same gene, but there are like 90 different mutations in that gene. Heterogeneity is the nature of being a mongrel species. And because of all of that, it took a number of years to get, and I'd love to actually do the thought experiment. If you had those technologies available, could Vertex have taken 4 years off of getting from ivacaftor to Trikafta and beyond, because we still have 20% of the patients for whom we have nothing to do? Could it in fact have knocked off time? And if it knocks off time, can it knock off cost? Can it knock off availability? And it's an interesting prospect. I don't know if you can actually do the in silico experiment to see if you had those techniques beforehand. Would it have changed the cost of drug development? Would it have given us perhaps even better drugs than we've got now?
Yeah, and there's a lot of high science that artificial intelligence is being applied to. I think it's hard to say whether we would discover molecules.
Yeah.
For sure, we can compress development timelines by shrinking the amount of time that we're spending writing regulatory diseases. When somebody said, so when a clinician says, this is the protocol that we want to run,
Right.
to having that protocol written and all of the investigator material written. So there's a ton of value in really dry stuff that is not very scientific, but that's where a lot of companies are focused now, because the generative tools are so perfectly suited to that. So that's sort of the first wave. I think anything that is internal knowledge management, content generation, literature search, that's going to look fundamentally different a year from now than it does today. I'm certain of it, or it's already changing. Then we'll see the broader innovation. Are we finding new molecules? Are we finding good molecules faster? Are we targeting innovations?
Well, I remember I was at Merck for a little while doing some of the early work in pharmacogenomics, and they decided that they were going to submit electronic record, an electronic NDA to the FDA, which was on a computer that they brought down to the FDA with two people who sat with the reviewer to review that NDA. It's not that long ago, but if you think about the unbelievable wastes of time that we go through, and people getting very frustrated and even giving up on compounds because it is taking too much time, or because we're not able to communicate them effectively to a regulator. I'd love to have something that could create a Vulcan mind between the EMA and the FDA and the rest of the international regulatory community. That in fact, if we understood what was causing these holdups, we should be able to move much.
Yeah, although this conference is really focused on the drug industry, I want to point to one thing that Doug Long was talking about before, which is a lot of the costs in the healthcare system is in the hospitals and so forth. And it's my hope that AI can make a lot of the costs in the healthcare system, unrelated drugs, more efficient, right? I mean, we already know that you can use AI and other techniques to do a better job in radiology in looking at X-rays and MRIs and so forth. And that potentially can reduce costs. And it's all out of one pie. So if the hospitals and the diagnostic and the testing chew up a huge amount of the dollars, that means there are fewer dollars available for the drug treatment and so forth. So my hope is, even though this topic, but I know that, I happen to agree with Doug Long and his previous saying a lot of the cost problem is really in the healthcare system, not the drugs. The other thing that the big picture on this question of innovation is I am very, very pleased that so many of the new drugs are increasingly able to cure a disease rather than just prolong life. Because the reality is we all know that oncology for a long, long time, the best they could do is just add a few months or a year to someone's life. But we're now increasing across a lot of different therapeutic areas, creating new innovations that actually can cure. And that really is the exciting part to me of where the drug industry is heading. And there's just some wonderful research and wonderful work that's being done along those lines. And I'm sort of cautiously optimistic that that part, which is curing, is going to escalate.
And as a pediatrician, I throw in prevent.
And prevent.
We struggle and have struggled forever with mental illness. How to define it, what it means. If you look at severe mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disease, these are diseases that present often at the beginning of college, end of high school. And once the disease is raging, people suffer. Families suffer, the individual suffers, society suffers. I had lunch with the warden of the Cook County Jail. Don't ask me why I was having lunch with him. Exactly. But it was at a mental health meeting actually, and his comment was, I run a mental institution with no psychiatrists, no psychologists, and no social workers. If we get smart enough, and I think we don't. Some of it's sociology. I mean, we always dance around in a ring and suppose while the truth sits in the middle and knows, as Robert Frost said. But the issue is if we can use these technologies to markedly accelerate our ability to look at early signals, so that before or really just at the time somebody is beginning to lose it, we can intervene and help them. The ultimate societal impact would be utterly enormous. And it's interesting. I mean, I view all of those diseases as developmental diseases. We just don't quite understand what to look for. And we've been pretty dense about it. And we're not producing psychiatrists, once Freud got defrocked, it's been a hard go. But the reality of it is, as a society, we suffer terrible. And there are other physical diseases as well, obviously, Alzheimer's, and all the other things that have a sort of natural history, but we haven't identified that early natural history to be able to modify, prevent, and as Peter said, if you can't, to treat.
Yeah, and on the preventative side, I know I keep quoting Doug Long, but Doug, your chart that showed the obesity, I had my annual physical the other day, and he didn't have that chart, but he referred to essentially that. He said, he said, look, you've got to lose 10 pounds. And then he explained the medical reasons, and he said, I told you this last 3 years, and I'm getting tired of telling you, but it is a very important factor, right? Because the preventive part, right, which is somehow we've got to do a better job of getting people in the United States and everywhere to, watch their weight, because all these other things, whether it's diabetes or whatever, are directly impacted by that. So I promised him again that I was going to lose 10 pounds, and he looked at me in the eye and says, I hope that's true, but I'm not that optimistic.
Should we skip dinner tonight?
So last comments, and then we're gonna move to our next last session and try to end early. Any last comment? Eli, any last comment on this topic of disruptive innovation or pass?
Yes.
No? Okay.
No, let's move on and we can do it in the context.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Anyway, we had a break. I like this. It's a nice combination of people from different angles, but thank you so much. And all I can say is there are going to be disruptive innovations, but some disruptions are good and some are not good. And I'm just hoping for as many positive disruptions as possible.
Exactly.